Coming next, David Duke. On Wednesday, he withdrew from the Republican presidential race. The former Louisiana state representative and 1991 gubernatorial candidate met with reporters at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. During his presidential campaign, David Duke was unable to win any convention delegates. Republicans will gather this August in Houston, Texas for their national convention. Mr. Duke spoke for about 30 minutes and then took reporters' questions.
Morning. So we'll get these mics in the right direction. Good morning to you, members of the press, and really good morning to the American people, people who are watching across the country. A lot of people have wondered and speculated as to what my political plans were in this race and if I was going to run third party in this election or as independent in this election, and I'll be answering that question at the end of my talk. The first thing I want to do is recount the issues of this election and the issues I think the American people are concerned about in this election year. First, ladies and gentlemen, there's no way in the world that this nation will continue to stand unless we work very hard to change the way the government is treating the American people. Government is out of control in America. Spending is out of control in America. Government's becoming all-encompassing in this country. It's destroying free enterprise, destroying initiative, and taking away individual rights and liberties every day. We've got to have a change. The two-party system that this country has had for so long is not really working any longer. Political bosses of both parties control who the candidates are. Political parties are controlling, and the bosses control what the people will hear and see in each party. In this last election, the Republican Party, I was denied even presence in the ballot in a number of states. In states where I campaigned, even in a limited basis with limited funds, I received 7% in South Carolina, 13% in Mississippi, 9% in Louisiana, many other states. And yet a number of states kept us off the ballot. This is the type of tactic that belongs in the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, not the United States of America. We must have an open political process here in this country. And we're seeing government and the insiders take more and more control over our society. In the Republican Party, we see this. In the Democratic Party, we see it. I don't agree with all the positions, obviously, of Jerry Brown. I certainly disagree with his idea of having Jesse Jackson as Vice President of the United States of America. That would be a tragedy for this country. But the way he was treated in the Democratic Party is reminiscent of the way myself and Patrick Buchanan has been treated in the Republican Party. We've got to have a more open process. But saying that, I think we've got to understand, as far as being a conservative in this country, the Republican Party is our best shot. There's no way in the world that third-party efforts are, in the long run, successful in this country. They might come out of a major party at some time, but on their own, it's a very difficult thing. Ross Perot is certainly attempting to do that. He's attempting to go and attack the basic structure of American politics, come from the outside entirely. I think he can get some votes. I don't see Perot being very successful. Perot might determine who the next president of the United States is, though. And at this point, I think that Ross Perot would probably help Clinton and damage President Bush, because I see most of the liberals voting for the liberal candidate Clinton, and I certainly see the black bloc vote and the organized Democratic vote not switching over to Perot, whereas many independent-minded people who are often conservatives and more moderates, I see them certainly being attracted by the Perot candidacy. But the real issues of this election go beyond what Perot is talking about and President Bush. They even go beyond somewhat of what Buchanan is talking about and Jerry Brown. Money is controlling American politics. A lot of the gurus in the national press, of which some of you are certainly representatives, are controlling American politics, and they're deciding who our candidates are and who they won't be. We've got to have more access, more open debate in America, and the press has got to begin to stop determining who our candidates are and let the people do that. And we've got to discuss the real issues that we're not facing up to in this country. I like to say that we are beginning to open the debate on some critical issues in our society. For instance, welfare. As you know, I was the first candidate in this country who openly used welfare reform as a campaign issue and idea. And I think we must have welfare reform in this nation, again, if our country is going to survive. We have a massive rising welfare underclass in this country that's growing like a parasitic growth in the American body politic. In this, our nation's capital, we're in Washington, D.C. I read an article pardon me, from the New York Times which stated 42% of the black males in this city are in some sort of trouble with the law, either in jail, on probation, parole. 42%. That's damaging to them, it's damaging to our community, it's damaging to our nation. And this is a product of this massive welfare system that's now out of control in this country. We're encouraging people to have illegitimate children, not being responsible in that. We're encouraging people not to work. We're allowing drugs to pervade the social welfare system and control public housing, control many of our cities. You know, we're not giving impetus anymore on the other side of the coin in terms of the welfare system in America. We've got to change that. We've also got to be concerned about the demographics and the international considerations. And we have right now massive numbers of American companies who are going bankrupt and Americans who are losing their jobs because the New World Order is presented by President Bush and certainly endorsed by liberal Democrats such as Clinton. And what is this New World Order policy? Basically, it's sublimating the interests and the values of the United States of America for this gossamer New World Order concept. Right now, this world is in crisis. Economic, social, political, and ecologic. We have an ecological crisis right now. The first world nations are beginning to address the problems of pollution, for instance. Right now, the third world is not. And now we're shifting our productive capacity from the first world every day to nations like Brazil, nations like Mexico, that pollute freely. And this planet cannot continue to exist to survive unless we begin to protect our environment. If the Amazon rainforest burns down, all of us will suffer, here in the United States, in Europe, and all over this planet. And yet right now we have open trade policies with Brazil. We should be waging economic war on Brazil with as much vigor as we did against Saddam Hussein in terms of his political corruption and physical corruption, as far as the environmental corruption that's taking place in the Amazon rainforest, until Brazil acts to defend this precious resource in the world. We continue to shift our productive capacity to the third world, nations that don't worry about environmental protection, that don't worry about decent wages, that don't have to worry about paying high taxes, and then we wonder why American business is suffering, why American jobs are lost, and we've got to begin to put this country first. And America has been like a lifeboat for the world. We have provided so much support and help for countries when they've had disasters and tragedies like earthquakes or famine. When this lifeboat is lost, I worry about the condition of this planet. But if we're really going to help the planet, I think we've got to first shore up the foundation of our own home. We do need trade. Obviously, no nation can survive without trade, but it's got to be fair trade. Not necessarily free trade, but fair trade. We've got to have a policy in terms of our own borders to protect the integrity of our borders. Right now, America is being made over. We're losing the integrity of our society. Our children are going to be growing up as strangers in their own land, in their own country. We see this all the time. I used to come to the nation's capital as a young boy and feel very safe on the streets. And the crime problem was low here. You had some of the finest schools in the United States of America, public schools. It's very funny to say that now. Now you have police officers in your hallways here in Washington, D.C. You've got a horrendous murder rate, the nation's highest, horrendous drug rates. Washington, D.C. is becoming a third world society. It's becoming a crime-laden society. This is our nation's capital, and it reflects the problems that go on in our society. And of course, it's administered by our government and by our Congress. You know, we've got to begin to change that. We're losing the foundations. We have massive immigration coming into this country from all over the world. I respect all the different countries of the world. I respect Mexico. I enjoy visiting Mexico. I enjoy visiting South America. I've been there. I've been in Southeast Asia. You know, I've helped the American war effort there as a teacher working with the State Department. I've been around the world. I respect those cultures, but we here in America have a right to preserve our way of life and have our children grow up with the same values and principles of our forefathers. When Jesse Jackson goes to Stanford University and says, hi-ho, Western culture must go, this is not an idle threat. This is becoming a reality. As you know, many of our children this last Thanksgiving in their own schools could not celebrate Thanksgiving as Thanksgiving. They had to celebrate Thanksgiving as a day of mourning or a day of tragedy, looking at it from the point of view of the Native American Indians rather than the point of view of the European settlers that brought the principles of democracy and freedom to this land, to this continent, and built this great country. Thank God European settlers came to America and built the greatest nation the world has ever seen, and the light this country's been to democracy and freedom. And now that light's being extinguished very rapidly because those same elements that came forth and brought forth this nation are soon to become a minority in their own nation. And their values are becoming sublimated to this new majority. And we've got to begin to work to protect the consensus that creates America. And what is that consensus? The consensus is a common language. And that basic standard is being cut down and brought down across America. In some parts of this country today, and you go into a public school, you'll find Spanish as the primary language of instruction. In some parts of America right now, this morning, you could go, and if you can't speak Spanish, you can't do some basic business. We're losing the foundations of the country. We're becoming balkanized. We have massive immigration coming in, and massive illegal immigration coming in. Our government hasn't even the will to protect this country from the massive numbers of illegals that cross our border illegally. And they often overburden our social welfare system, add to our crime problems. Look at the gangs we have across America. And most of these gangs aren't Americans. Most of these gangs have come in from the immigration. And we find this continued and increased across this country repeatedly. It's cost us jobs, it's cost us welfare monies, it's cost us crime, it's cost us overloading our medical system because all the people coming in, it's hurt our educational system, and it's even affecting the culture of the country. Western civilization can't go. We've got to protect it, and to do that, we've got to protect the people who have the heritage of Western civilization. It doesn't mean suppressing anybody, because I believe in equal rights for every American. That's one of the principles the country was founded upon. But to show you the dispossession that's taken place of the American majority no longer has equal rights. In fact, we are second-class citizens in our own country. The white people who are watching this program know that when their children can go forth and qualify for higher education, for college, more than likely, if they're middle class, they can't even get a government loan. Yet how many of those students can pay for their own education out of their own pocket? And if middle-class parents have 2 or 3 children, they can't even pay for one child's tuition, more or less 3 children. But if they can't qualify for a government loan, how do they go to college? How do they make it, even if they have higher grades? And yet we give massive government loans and help to people. You know, we give grants. We don't even give loans to many of the people in this country. We give grants. We say, go to college and we'll pay your way. We'll pay your tuition and we'll give you spending money beside and living expenses beside. And yet we've got middle-class Americans, young people who've qualified, who are talented, who can't even go to school, who can't even get a loan, a low-interest loan to go to school. You know, I don't see why in the world we shouldn't change the system from grants to loans for everyone. Why in the world couldn't a poor child pay back a loan any more than a middle-class student can pay back a loan once they go to school? That way we can give everybody a chance to go to higher education in this country who wants to go. And everybody could pay a very low interest in their college admission. But again, we have a system that goes against the American middle class, the bread and butter of this country. That young person, then he goes to school and he graduates, he works hard or she works hard, studies hard. Then they find themselves, when the recruiters come around from the major corporations, they find racial discrimination going on. They've got better grades, they got better tests for the particular job, then they find themselves discriminated against. And this is protected and lauded and praised by our government, by our system in this country. Protected. And yet these are the sons and the daughters of the men and women who built America, who gave us our Constitution, who gave us our economic freedom, who gave us our foundations of this country. And their children, their great-grandchildren and great-great-great-grandchildren find themselves second-class citizens in their own country. Discrimination goes on in jobs and promotions and scholarships. It goes on in small businesses, for instance. It goes on in every aspect of American life, and again, the majority is becoming a second-class citizenry. We see the tax system inequitable, again, against the middle class. I've heard a lot of people talk. The one thing I really like about Jerry Brown's programs, aside from his ecological defense, is this fact that he's advocated a flat tax. And the media has immediately attacked Jerry Brown and said Jerry Brown's flat tax is going to make the rich pay less and the poor pay more. But they always leave out of the equation the fact that a 13% flat tax eliminates the Social Security tax. The truth is, under Jerry Brown's proposal, somebody working at a McDonald's or a Burger King will make more or bring home more with Jerry Brown's proposal in the current tax system, because they won't be paying the Social Security taxes, which they pay regardless of their income in this country. You know, and the media has not been fair. A lot of liberals in the media have not been fair in talking about the fact we need an equitable tax system, something that will encourage business, encourage investment, and help the producer and the consumer without the loopholes and the special interest considerations of the tax structure in this country. But the middle class is being squeezed. This new world order, how is most of the world? Most of the world has no middle class. Most of the world has a few people with all the money, and most of the people have nothing. And I just read another study, another economic survey that showed that 1% of the people in the country had 90% of the wealth. 1% had 90% of the wealth. The great middle class is being squeezed in this country. And again, the middle class is primarily that element that built America to begin with, the element that we're losing. We talk about educational reform in America, and we don't look around at the rest of the world. The reason why Japan and Europe is passing us up in education is because we've gotten away from excellence. We're afraid to even give a child an A or an F anymore. Might hurt somebody's feelings to give them an F. We try to get rid of gradations between grades, and we say pass or fail. Pass or fail. How does that encourage excellence and striving in this country? We have forced busing in America, which has devastated every system, including the city we live in right now. Many of these congressmen and senators and Supreme Court justices and the rest of them who've pushed forced busing on the American people, they wouldn't send their child to a public school in D.C. In fact, if they're in their automobile, if one of these Supreme Court justices, and they're in an automobile and they have a flat tire in some of the minority areas of D.C., they would be scared to death. They would be scared to death. And then we send children in this country where adults would be afraid to go. Forced busing has caused white flight. It's lowered the tax structure of every major city. It's caused resegregation of schools. It's caused violence between the races, and it's lowered educational quality across America. But again, The middle class doesn't want it, but again, the government, so out of touch with the middle class, has pushed this forced busing of the American people. And as a result, American education is floundering. And let me say something to you. People say, what are the causes of American education? Some of it's part of the liberal curriculum, but a great part of it's busing. And you can take a look in America where you've had great amounts of busing in the major cities. Education has dropped dramatically in the last 20 years. You go to areas of America that does not have busing, and you'll find educational levels almost the same as they were 20 years ago. But again, government tries to racially classify people. Government puts people in certain peg holes, and government tries to control our lives. We don't even have the right to have a neighborhood school anymore in our country. And again, the founding majority of the American people, our rights and issues are not being listened to and studied and worried about. Finally, and this is something many politicians don't talk about, but it's got to be talked about. We're getting away from our Christian roots. Last time I was at the National Press Club, when I announced my candidacy for the presidency, I pointed out the fact, whether you like it or not, or whether anybody in this country likes it or not, this is fundamentally a Christian nation. And that every sign of our Declaration of Independence and every author of our Constitution of the United States was, in fact, a Christian, a believing Christian. And Christianity has as much of the founding of this country and the values of this country and Western civilization, Western Christian civilization, as any other factor, more so. And yet we're even getting away from our right to practice our faith and continue our traditions and our culture. We're not talking about separation of church and state here. Obviously, government has no right to change or force people to do things religiously. We don't have any single state religion. But we have Christian traditions in America. And if a child doesn't sing a Christmas carol in public schools, if a child does not learn about his heritage and is allowed to say a prayer, what happens to the traditions of a country? And yet in this country there are many public schools where you can't even sing Christmas carols anymore. And I'm not exaggerating. We are a Christian country. And Christian ideals and values make this country strong and have given us the moral strength that we've lost. Now we've got to get back to that. And that doesn't mean the state sponsoring religion. What it means is allowing people to practice just the rudimentary traditions and values of our faith. I am a Christian, and I'm not ashamed to say it. And I believe in Jesus Christ, and I think that we've got to maintain the values of our faith and our country. And then people start saying, oh yeah, but there are many people who are Jewish and many people who are Buddhist. Well, of course there are, and any other religion or Muslim needs to be respected and dealt with in this country. But well over 90% of the American people are Christian, and when we are denied the right to sing a Christmas carol or say a prayer in our schools, you're denying, again, the great American majority, which is being denied its rights, its privileges, its heritage, continuously. And I'm not talking about special privileges. I'm talking about the privileges simply to continue their culture and their values and their heritage. And really, we are supposed to be a government of the majority, aren't we? Isn't that what we're supposed to be? Certainly with minority rights protected, but aren't we supposed to be a government of the majority? And boy, we've really lost that. We've really lost that. In South Africa right now, a lot of liberals are talking about South Africa and saying, well, South Africa's got to have black majority rule. Would any of those liberals in America say that America's got to have white majority rule and use those words? Would any of them say that and use those words in America? We have a double standard of racism. The political correctness that's running this country has got to end. We've got to speak frankly and openly. And I believe my participation in the American political process has helped that process. I'd like to recount now the differences in politics in the last 4 years. When I ran, I was the first candidate in this country to talk about affirmative action and the need for equal rights for all and use it as a campaign issue. I won that race for the Louisiana House of Representatives, and since that time, Jesse Helms has picked it up and used it. Pete Wilson used it in California successfully. And many other candidates across America are now using that issue. I was the first candidate to talk about real welfare reform and saying it's time to reduce the illegitimate welfare birth rate in America. I saw President Bush give a State of the Union address, talking about it's time to require welfare recipients to be responsible and not have illegitimate children they can't afford, that they must make the American taxpayer pay for. I wonder where President Bush heard that before. It was the first time he mentioned it. I've been talking about it now for a long time. I first proposed a flat tax back in 1988 when I had a very short-lived presidential ambition. And I ran at that point third party, and I talked about flat tax. I used it in my Senate race effectively. Now we hear Jerry Brown talk about it. I talked about workfare instead of welfare as a campaign issue. A year later, Clinton used it in re-election for governor of Arkansas as a campaign issue, and now it's one of his basic platforms and planks. I've talked about immigration from the beginning of my political life, and now Patrick Buchanan certainly is talking about it. And I like Patrick Buchanan. I think he's a good man. But he wrote an article a few years ago, and he said David Duke shows the Republican Party the way. I'm talking about issues. I'm not saying I changed Patrick Buchanan's mind on anything, but I think, gave him the idea through my success in Louisiana politics to also run in these issues. I have not been successful in the presidential race in the Republican Party this time. I've gotten significant votes. I got as many of the major Democratic candidates in respective primaries. I got more votes per dollar expended than any candidate for president in this election year. About 5 times per capita more than any other candidate. President Bush is a very strong incumbent, as you know, within the party. A president always will be. I did not have the time or the inclination to get involved in the New Hampshire primary after coming off the governor's race in Louisiana. By the way, in those 2 statewide elections in my state where people know me the best, I came very close to winning a governorship and close to winning a U.S. Senate seat. I got a higher percentage of the vote statewide, even with a 30% black bloc vote, which is one of the highest in the country, than any primary that Patrick Buchanan scored in this year. He got a high of 37%. I got 45 and 39% respective in my own particular state. I had defeated an incumbent Republican governor in the state of Louisiana, which is almost unheard of, as you know. You know, the people of my state know me, and they've supported me greatly because I've talked about issues, but now the things I'm talking about are beginning to be talked about by other candidates and other politicians across America, but we've got to continue to hold them to it. I don't think they're going to do anything about it. They're too busy writing bad checks. They're too busy not talking about the real issues. They're too busy having campaign rhetoric, and then when it comes down to voting on issues and raising issues, they're too timid to stand up in Congress, and they're too timid to stand up in the Senate and say these things that they've got to say and they've got to do. We have a national debt. This is one thing Mr. Perot is addressing very well. National debt that's going out of sight. I read one economic report that says our national debt by the turn of the century will be higher. If the present rates continue, it will be higher than the current, all forms of current revenue our government has right now in this country. What is the government going to do then? How much higher are our taxes going to go, and how many more services are going to be cut back from the American people? This government is out of control. Now, what are the answers? How are we going to solve this and change it? Mr. Perot thinks he has some answers. And I think Mr. Perot is a good alternative. I'm not endorsing him. But I think we need outsiders in politics in America. There are certain things I like about George Bush, certain things I don't, many things I don't. There are certain things I like about Clinton, and many things that I don't. But I know that my role in this presidential election is over. I've done the best that I could. We had a tough start in this race. And in this race, once you get behind with media recognition and once you get behind in fundraising, it's tough to catch up. So I'm going to let you know today that I have no plans to continue the quest for the Republican nomination. I will go to the Republican National Convention. I will be available for nomination if there's a stalemate, but I don't see that as likely to happen. The campaign is not over, but my active participation, our quest is over for the Republican nomination. Now the question remains, am I or will I run as an independent for President of the United States in this election year? I've been campaigning in this country and in the state of Louisiana for the last 2 years. I ran for Senate, as you know, against an 18-year incumbent, and I ran for governor of my state. I was outspent, outgunned by every quarter. Every member of the establishment came out against me. Every major paper in my state came out against me, and I was outspent 10 to 1, often 20 to 1 in media. It's taken a heck of a toll on myself and my family. You know, I really am very much tired of the personal attacks been levied against me and has reflected upon my family. So many things untrue, so many things that have been so hateful and so harmful. I've really worked hard to overcome that, continue to tell the truth, and I think we have. I overcame those smears in Louisiana, did very well in the election, winning 55% and 60% of the white vote respectively in my races. But I feel that I've done what I can do. At this point, I've gone as far as I can go. I think I've started a ball rolling and started a consensus on the major issues that are before the American people. But I don't see how a third-party effort at this time is really going to heal the country or do very well for the Republican Party. And I do think the Republican Party is still our best hope, the best hope for the principles I believe in. And I don't think the Republican Party is perfect. And I think there's got to be some changes. And I think we need more people like Buchanan and David Duke and fewer like George Bush in the Republican Party if we're going to survive and do well in the future. But I think the Republican Party is the best hope at this point. So I will tell you this, that I am not, and I have no plans to run third party for President of the United States. What I'm going to do is spend some more time with my wonderful 2 daughters, Erica and Kristen. And I'm going to spend more time doing what I need to do to get my own self in order. Over the last 2 years, gone into debt to the tune of $40,000 because when you campaign, you can't attend to your business needs and purposes. And I'm going to write on these issues and lecture. There are many people that want to hear from me across the country to speak about these issues. And I'm not planning to run for President of the United States. As far as any other political options in my life, I leave them open. I am not looking at any races at this time. I'm not planning to run for any office at this time. But my options will always be open. And I'm just very, very thankful for the people around the country who've really supported me. We still have some debts in this campaign we need to pay for. And those of you across the country who'd like to help my campaign, I urge you to do so. And those of you out there who would like to continue to hear my issues and viewpoints can certainly do so. I have a newsletter, the David Duke Report, where I talk about these issues every month. And people around the country can write to me, and I'll be glad to send you a free copy and let you in on the issues that we're talking about. And they can write, now this is my Jerry Brown time, I guess. They can write to David Duke, and that's David Duke. It's Metairie, Louisiana, M-E-T-A-I-R-I-E, Metairie, Louisiana. That's all the address you need. David Duke, Metairie, Louisiana, M-E-T-A-I-R-I-E, Louisiana. The zip code is 70001. And I'm anxious to hear from people across the country. I want to hear from you. I want to continue to let you know what my opinions and ideas and issues are. And I am not out of the political process at all. I will continue to comment. I will speak. I will lecture. I will write. And I will work. I am not making any endorsements for President of the United States. I certainly prefer Patrick Buchanan over President Bush. I don't know if that choice will be available to us in the Republican Party. But I'm not making any endorsements whatsoever in this race. And I'm not running third party. And finally, I'd like to say to the people who out there, who across America, who are watching, that I really appreciate from the bottom of my heart your goodwill toward me, because in spite of the very vicious attacks that I've suffered from media, so many people have been so kind and so loving toward me. And anywhere I go in the country, or if I get in an airplane or go anywhere in the nation, so many of you come up and say hello and wish me well, and I'm thankful to you. I'm thankful to the supporters who have offered me support over the last 2 years in the races that I've been in. I will continue the fight. I will never give up. I will never relinquish the principles that I believe in, my faith in Christ, my faith in this country, and my faith in the people that made this country great and sustain its power and its beauty and its grace. I will continue to work hard and fight, and this fight is by far not over. I am not leaving the fight. I'm leaving this particular race for the presidency. I'm going to remain in the fight for the rekindling of the American spirit and the American ideal and the people that made this country great, and the rights of all the people of this nation, whether they be of minorities or the great American majority. That's my promise and my pledge, and that's what I'll do in the rest of my life. And I'm willing to open for questions.
Would you endorse President Bush after he gets the nomination?
I plan on attending the Republican convention, and I'll have to make that decision at that point. I want to see what the Republican platform is going to be. I want to see what President Bush's policies are going to be. So far, President Bush has not really come over to my viewpoint or Patrick Buchanan's. I mean, we've seen him change on the taxes. He said he was wrong about the tax increases. And we have seen President Bush, renege on, only a couple of issues. I haven't heard him really make some strong pronouncements about affirmative action, on ending this racial discrimination affirmative action. I've seen him make no strong pronouncements to really get the engine going to stop forced busing. There have been some Supreme Court decisions that could help us end forced busing. I think the president's got to get behind that and really, cause this change in American education. The president seems to be still firmly holding to his New World Order and absolute free trade and free trade agreements with Mexico, which will destroy American industry and business. So I've got to see what President Bush will do. I am a Republican. I don't plan to actively work against any Republican candidate, but I'm going to have to wait and see if I can endorse President Bush.
Pat Buchanan, as his race began to wind down in the sense that he understood that Mr. Bush was going to get the nomination, began taking credit for having, as he put it, knocked you out of the race, as he says the Republican establishment had been unable to do. Does Pat Buchanan have a point in saying that he offered a more acceptable alternative in himself than to you than anyone else had offered, and certainly than the Republican establishment offered?
Well, to a point, that's true. I mean, he said many of the things that I've been saying for a long time, and he finally put it into the political process. But the real factor is, the reason I was kind of lost in the race was what happened in New Hampshire. Look at the Democratic candidates, what happened to many of those candidates after New Hampshire. He was in New Hampshire in that race. There was a lot of media attention with that. He had a big head start in fundraising, more than I did. And it looked, the first night, the original press reports were that he got about 45% in the New Hampshire race. Of course, he got 37%. And this was big news, and the momentum really helped Patrick Buchanan on that basis. And that's what really was his basis. In fact, I don't think that people voted for him more than myself because they thought he was a better individual or a better person. I think a lot of people admire the fact that I've overcome adversity in my life, and I've overcome a lot of obstacles in my life. I think what people saw is that Patrick Buchanan having a greater chance of winning. The truth is, as I said earlier, that I got more votes, a higher percentage of votes in 2 statewide races in Louisiana, 2 of them, than even against the Republican incumbent governor, than Patrick Buchanan got in any primary at all in the entire United States of America. So I think I still have appeal for many, many voters. I just think he got the momentum in this race. Yes, sir.
This year or in the future?
I don't have any plans to run for Congress, but all options must be open, but I have no plans.
Isn't the fact that Ross Perot is so strong the real reason that you're abandoning a third-party candidacy?
I think Ross Perot's candidacy, a third-party candidacy, would preclude a lot of other third-party candidacies. And, but that's not the reason for me. You know, you have to look at practicality. I got involved in the presidential race because I thought I had a chance. Certainly it was a slim chance. It was against overwhelming odds. If I'd done better in the primaries, we'd have a chance. And if President Bush, for some reason, bowed out of the race, then I would have had a chance. But I try to deal in realities at this point in my political life, and a third-party candidacy at this point I think will accomplish little. Ross Perot, though, would affect any third-party candidacy. There's no question about that. If he does run third party, he will be formidable. I don't realistically think Ross Perot can win the presidency of the United States third party or independent. There's no real apparatus. He'll be outspent, he'll be outgunned, he'll be out-mediaized, he'll be out-organized, and there's just no way he could really win. But he can, as a third-party candidate, determine who the next president of the United States is. And this is one consideration I had. I mean, even with Patrick Buchanan in the race, I still received around 10% of many of the Deep South states that I campaigned with, at least some campaigning. In Louisiana, I campaigned in one stop and spent nothing on television in Louisiana, and I got 10% of the vote. A lot of the states across the South will be very close. I think I would catch a lot of the Buchanan vote if I ran. That might defeat Bush and put the liberal Democrats in. And as much as I dislike Bush, and I really dislike President Bush for many reasons, his economic and social policies. Individually, as a human being, he's a nice person, good man, but I dislike his politics. I've got to tell you, Clinton is no alternative whatsoever to President Bush. I mean, Clinton is in the back pocket of the far left and the liberal policymakers of the Democratic Party. The DLC, let's make it very clear. The DLC openly said over the last 3 years that we have to posture ourselves more for the American middle class if we're going to be successful. Clinton's positions are only posturing, and that's what the Democratic Party is doing today. If we had a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress, I think it would be disastrous for the American people. And I think the Republican president and Democratic Congress has been disastrous as well, but I think it would be even more disastrous for the American people. So I cannot support Clinton whatsoever, and I think he would be the worst of the two alternatives at this point.
But what about Ross Perot? I mean, if he does better than you think he'll do, he overcomes these obstacles you cite, is Ross Perot, in terms of what he stands for, somebody that you could support?
Many of the aspects of Ross Perot I agree with. I mean, he seems to be for fair trade rather than free trade, and I certainly agree with that. He's definitely for less government. He's definitely for reducing the deficit. And all those positions I can definitely agree with. And I think most conservatives will agree with most of the things that Ross Perot says. That's why he's a much more dangerous candidate for President Bush than Governor Clinton. And a lot of people are saying he'll hurt Clinton more. That's just not true. Look, the Democratic base is your minority voters across America. Most of those are controlled by the Democratic machine in our respective states, such as in Louisiana. The black bloc vote in America will not go to Ross Perot. The Hispanic vote that does go for Democrats, and there's many Hispanics that vote for Republicans, those that go for Democrats will not go for Ross Perot. The liberals in the country will not go for Ross Perot. You know, no way, considering his conservative ties in the past, Ross Perot's conservative postures in the past, over Bill Clinton. So the only people who are really going to be questioning whether to vote for President Bush or Ross Perot will be conservatives and will be middle-class Americans who traditionally vote Republican. So Ross Perot, I believe his candidacy will defeat George Bush. I see it right now. If George Bush, in my opinion, for whatever that's worth, if we had now had a candidacy between George Bush and Clinton by themselves, I think Bush would win a narrow victory. If it's George Bush, Clinton, and Perot, I see Clinton winning a narrow victory.
The party has tried very hard to distance itself from you. Do you expect to be welcomed or even credentialed at the convention? And if you get into the convention, what do you expect your role to be?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if the word is that I should be welcomed at the convention. I think the Republican Party has to welcome all people who identify themselves as Republicans with all points of view. And I've said a lot of things here at this speech. It's the same things I say at every speech, every radio show, different words, different phrases, same basic issues. I think the Republicans can identify with what I've said here today. Maybe I say it a little stronger than most Republicans, a little clearer, a little tougher, but I speak the way most Republicans speak, and I think the Republican Party must have a place in it for David Duke and Patrick Buchanan. Patrick Buchanan was kept off the ballot in New York and many other states. I mean, we've got to open up the ballot process in this country for everyone. That's what a democratic system's all about. And there's no ideological test to be Republican or Democrat. And I think if there is one, we're in trouble. Because we only have a two-party system in this country. And if access to either Democratic or Republican Party is curtailed by party bosses, basically you curtail access to the American process. We only have one member of Congress who's not a Republican or Democrat. That's not enough. And if you have that kind of a system, there's no way in the world that you can have a free access to democratic ideas. We're around the world talking about democracy and freedom, and then we have people in the RNC going around trying to keep David Duke off the ballot.
Here's my question. I know you can be a Republican. I want to know if you think you can get into the convention.
Well, sure, I can get. I know many delegates who will be there, and certainly once you have a delegate, they can get you passes into the convention. So I will be at the Republican convention, whether a couple of party bosses want me there or not.
Two-part question. One is, when you announced at the National Press Club, you had a large number of your staff and supporters acting as bodyguards and aides de camp. I see you alone standing here now as you bow out.
We have a few people here, but we didn't need, at that point, we needed some. I mean, obviously, this is, I have not been successful in this race for president, no question about it. And so the attention is not there. Obviously, the numbers of the media here are not as great as before, and I've not been successful in this race for president, simple as that.
I trust you be not as numerous rather than great. But in any case,
Say that again?
The members of the media is not as great. The other part of the question is, sincerity is a test being applied, or some feel should be applied by we who do what we do for a living to candidates. You've said that, as Buchanan and other candidates have said, other failed candidates have said, that the system has got to be open. Right now, it is not open. It does not suffer challengers gladly, nor does it tolerate third-party candidates very well. But one has to ask you, if you were the incumbent president and in control more or less of a nationwide party mechanism, would you behave any differently from the way George Bush's organization behaved in attempting to keep challengers out of his hair, politically speaking?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I'm not afraid to debate ideas and issues. I've debated when I was in the House of Representatives. I've faced any debate at any time. I believe in an open process because I'm not afraid of my ideas and issues. I'm not afraid to debate. I think anybody should be in the ballot in this country who wants to be in a ballot. If you have qualifications to be in the ballot, they should be fair-minded or broad-based for anyone to qualify for with a clear set of qualifications. And I believe in less government. That's the fundamental part of my philosophy. And I can back these words up, unlike many other candidates, with a voting record that proves that. In Louisiana House of Representatives, I never voted for one of the inflated budgets that they had. I never voted for a tax increase. I've always voted for less government, more individual rights and responsibilities anytime I had the chance to do that. So I think I can back that up, and if I were President of the United States, I would work very hard to lessen the impact of government. I would put a hiring freeze on in government. I would, by every executive order I could, I'd take out affirmative action and government control there. I would lessen the power of the government over the American people. And I'd use the veto. I would use the veto and use the veto and use the veto. The fact that George Bush has only used it, I think the figure 70 times or so in the last 4 years, I think is disgraceful. That veto should have been used 70 times a month. by the President of the United States to cut government. So yes, sir, I know that I'm sincere. I believe in less government. I'm a libertarian at heart, and I think that I think individuals have much more capability and right to make decisions in their lives rather than government can make those decisions for people. And the further government gets away from people, the less responsive government becomes. Your local representative or senator or local councilman is always more responsive to the citizen than, say, a state senator. Then a state senator is more responsible to the citizen than a U.S. senator. And then a U.S. senator is more responsible than a president. You know, we have a system, so I believe the more government is localized, the more responsive government becomes to people's needs and the more fair-minded they are to people's issues. So I believe in less government, and I think the same thing is true in the party. We have a lot of people talking about needing parliamentarianism in America. We need to change the way things are done because government's not working. That's no answer. The answer is not stronger parties. The answer is less stronger parties and more emphasis on individuals and issues in American life. And that's what I believe in.
You described Ross Perot essentially as a conservative, but a lot of people find him a little harder to pin down than that. He's pro-choice on abortion, and he favors a stronger role for government in industrial policy things, policy attributed more towards Democrats and liberals. You know, why do you think he's a conservative and not much more of a maverick?
Well, I disagree with him on the abortion issue, certainly, and that's one social issue that he would be classed more in the liberal part of the spectrum. But on the basic issues of less government, you know, less government intrusion into our lives, more individual responsibility and freedom, I think Perot is essentially conservative, yes.
You said you were in debt. Is that campaign debt only or
That's
personal?
just personal debt.
That's personal debt?
There's been lots of things said that David Duke makes money from campaigning. Nothing is further from the truth. By law, you can't get any money from campaigns. And in fact, campaigning in this country has been really a preserve of the rich. Because when you campaign, there's nothing else you can do during those periods. I mean, it's a thankless, it's an 18-hour-a-day job. It affects your health. It affects your time. You can't spend any time on any other business needs that you have. And it costs you money. And people who are wealthy and they can afford to campaign. People who are not, it's very tough on them. And I made bank loan out when I ran to help the gubernatorial race, and I've not made enough to pay that back. About $40,000 on my house. I own one piece of property, and so it's tough.
So you're in debt by $40,000. How are you going to make a living?
Well, you know, I have a computer business, and I also have, you know, a lot of lectures to do, and I've got a lot of appointments for lectures across America, and I'm working on a book right now as well, and I think that should be quite a good seller. I'm working on a book, and so I also have a newsletter that I publish, and that's basically how I make a living.
What's the topic of the book?
Huh?
What will the topic of the book be?
The topic of the book is going to be a very controversial life, and that's mine.
What is your campaign debt?
At this time, I think it's around $20,000 a year.
Would you cite as the key reason why your candidacy did not succeed?
I think we had two things that really affect, I don't say one factor, two factors. Probably the biggest factor is a late start. I had the gubernatorial race, of course, up to November of last year, and in this presidential races, you got to get started earlier than that. Secondly, in the first fundraising mailing that we didn't get that out till very, very late. I think March. We had a number of national mailers who I've used before for fundraising, and they were economically intimidated by my opponents. I'm not saying President Bush, but by some of the people who opposed me, that they were told that if they did mailings for me or did business with me, that they would not get any other business, and they would be bankrupted. And so they declined. The people we had set up to do the mailings to our supporter list and all that, they declined to do the mailings. We had to hustle and scrap to get another mailer, and then at the last second, the second mailer canceled out on us as well. So there was a lot of economic intimidation of our mailers. And once you get into that cycle, you're late, you're not into the New Hampshire primary, Buchanan got a lot of publicity, and then your fundraising didn't come in. It affects everything. Buchanan did well. A lot of the funds that I would receive would have gone to him. The publicity certainly went to Buchanan. and it was just too late for us to get really going in terms of the primaries. We didn't do badly, though, where we did some campaigning. I was in South Carolina twice. We got 7% of the vote there, and Mississippi got about 13%. I made 2 stops in Mississippi. So, I mean, I think we did pretty well in terms of some of the percentages around the country.
Despite your disclaimers, that one factor nationally was that there's still a revulsion of racism?
I think there is a revulsion of racism, and rightfully so. But I don't think the American people see me as a racist. I think they see the real racists as the Jesse Jacksons and these liberals who are putting on these programs of reverse discrimination called affirmative action. The racism of forced busing. The racism of Euro bashing that we get every night in our television, where our forefathers are put down as filthy exploiters and slavers and so forth, and minorities are always lauded. I think people are very tired of racism, but I think there's reverse racism in this country. You know, we have a Miss Black America beauty contest. We don't have a white America beauty contest. There is a reverse racism, and I think there's a revulsion of that. I do think that people who hear me for themselves, and not just read about what they say about me in the media. I mean, I've had some very unfair shots taken at me. This one fellow who worked in our campaign said, well, he never saw, in the 10 hours he was with me, he never saw me carrying a Bible, therefore I couldn't be a good Christian. Or I gulped down my food before saying grace. This is the kind of stuff they write in Reader's Digest about me. I mean, it was very vicious, but this kind of thing went on in Louisiana in 2 campaigns, and I still won a vast majority, a landslide of the white vote in both those statewide elections. So I think people, I don't see the election as a rejection of David Duke. It was just a rejection of the circumstances that I was in terms of the election. Yes, ma'am.
If you had run as a third-party candidate, do you have any estimate for what the percentage of Americans would have been who would have supported you? I don't know if your team took the pulse or took polls.
We did some polls and some inquiries into that, and we believe we could probably get around 10% and probably 15% or so in the South. We feel we could pick up at least half the Buchanan vote in the South.
Follow up, where do you think that vote is going to go now?
I think it would tend to go to President Bush, but I think probably about half of that, not the whole amount that I would have gotten, well, half of that would probably go to Perot if he runs. Perot would really hurt Bush in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Arkansas is going to lose anyway, Georgia, Florida, and the Sun Belt, western states. I mean, I think Perot would really hurt the Bush candidacy. That's what my grassroots feeling is, and I'm in the grassroots. I'm in the real grassroots, everybody. Question? Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you again one of these days. I think my politics will be the future in America. Thank you. And again, one more time, those who do want to contact me can write David Duke, Metairie, Louisiana. That's M-E-T-A-I-R-I-E, Louisiana, 70001. That's my Jerry Brown invitation. Thank you very much.